Namaskar. Welcome back to Atharva Forum. Today we have with us Arvindan Neelakandanji, and we'll be discussing the shenanigans of the National Council of Educational Research and Training, better known as NCERT. NCERT is an autonomous charitable body presided by the Minister of Education of the Government of India. The NCERT publishes textbooks for primary and high school students of many state education boards, as well as the Central Board of Secondary Education. Just a few days back, NCERT was again in an eye of storm when it responded to a RTI query and said that it has no documentation that proves Mughals built. The controversy of the content and curation of school textbooks is very well known amongst students, teachers, and parents. In 2019, Arvindan Neelakandan raised a very pertinent point. Is NCERT selling doctrinal propaganda in the guise of history? We'll discuss that topic today. And we won't restrict ourselves only to history, but to the larger paradigm of education. We'll also discuss what are the foreseeable dangers for the future of education in India, which may come masked as opportunities. Arvindanji, namaskar. How well NCERT fares in presenting history objectively to our students?
Very straight answer to your question is very badly and very dangerously, because NCERT is not ideologically neutral platform. It is ideologically loaded. And that ideology is set against the national spirit of India. And this is the unfortunate truth for most part of post-independent India. So actually what we have is a very dangerous situation of de-Indianizing the Indian children. So what do I mean by this? The NCERT history textbooks are all based on a particular book, a particular narrative set in a book, popular history book. A famous historian said about this particular book the following words. Imagine the history of Britain being written without at all mentioning Trafalgar Square. You cannot imagine such a history textbook of Britain. But in India, you have a history book on India without mentioning Chittoor at all. So what has happened is, in India, a particular important aspect of India's civilizational history, which each and every one of us has felt has been completely erased by none other than Jawaharlal Nehru. And that history book that particular historian criticized was Discovery of India. In Discovery of India, Jawaharlal Nehru gives secular reasons for Muhammad of Ghazni destroying Somnath. And then he points out that he took all the wealth and he built beautiful gardens and he built beautiful libraries in his capital. Now you look at our NCERT textbooks. If you look at the NCERT textbooks, they always mention this, that when Muhammad Ghazni invaded India, he raided, and the motivation was purely economic. That actually he did not destroy the temple because it was a Hindu temple. He destroyed it because he wanted the wealth. And what was this wealth doing in the temple? The student is made to think that way. So the student thinks like this. Oh, okay, it is good, right? He took all this wealth that was there in temple before an idol. And of course, the idol worship in the larger context is demeaned. So before the idol, all this wealth was there, useless for the people. The king, Muhammad Ghazni, took all this wealth and he created libraries. Wonderful. So this kind of a historiography is created. What is left out of this historiography? What is left out is this. 25,000 people sacrificed their lives for protecting Somnath temple. Forget the motivation of Muhammad Ghazni. Whether he destroyed Somnath temple because he was a religious fanatic, or he destroyed Somnath temple, he raided Somnath and killed people because he was only interested in the wealth, or it was a combination of both. Let us not get into that. The point that is to be taught to our children is this, that your ancestors, to protect this cultural and spiritual monument, they sacrificed their lives. And that is why even today the Somnath temple stands. That particular aspect of history is not communicated to the students. So the students never know the sacrifices that have been done throughout the history to safeguard their civilization. That they belong to this civilization, not just because of the birth of accident. They belong to this civilization mainly because their ancestors chose to do sacrifice. They chose dharma over death and other allurements. That aspect is not brought up in our history textbooks. That is number one. Number two, let us argue the case from their point of view, from a leftist historian's point of view, or from a Nehruvian's point of view. Then you may say, okay, if I am going to teach that Muhammad Ghazni came and killed all these people, and I am again and again going to tell that each and every time there was an invader, he killed Indians, then there would be a kind of enmity between the people, between the students, the section of students who belong to the religion of the invaders, the section of students whose ancestors chose to get converted because of the fear of death or whatever, and the students who still cling on to the civilization, cultural values of India. There may be a kind of disharmony, and that is why we are teaching like this. Well, we are not telling that you tell that all the Muslim invaders or the Islamic invaders or the Portuguese invaders or the Dutch invaders were all barbarians and the religion taught them to do this. You don't have to teach them all that, but teach them the sacrifices of the Indians. That is what we are telling. Why the textbooks are not telling that? That the textbooks have a right to tell. Leave all those things. Take the example of Ashfaqullah Khan. Ashfaqullah Khan was the mentor of Bhagat Singh. And I read about him not in any of the history textbooks. I read about him from an RSS publication called Rashtratan Parishad. They have published the biography of Ashfaqullah Khan. That was the only publication that is available to this day, most probably. So what is happening here? What is happening here is they want to present a history in which the cultural values of India are having no value at all. Take, for example, the way they present Bhakti movement. Bhakti movement is explained in terms of a lot of social dialectics, a lot of political necessities, and a lot of economic problems that were present in that particular time. Why they do like this is because they don't see anything inherently valuable in Indian history. At the same time, the argument that we are doing all this because there would be no negative stereotypes, etc., fall flat. Because I will prove this with an example. I have with me a history, a textbook, a social science textbook. And this social science textbook is for 6th standard students. What does it say? It talks about not creating stereotypes. And see this, page number 80, they say, a common stereotype about Muslims is that they are not interested in educating girls and therefore do not send girls to schools. However, studies have shown that poverty amongst Muslims is an important reason why Muslim girls do not attend school or drop out from school after a few years. So, page number 18, they are debunking a negative stereotype about Muslims. Fine. Now we come to page number 19. So here it says, Dr. Bhimarao Ambedkar, one of the greatest leaders of India, shares his first experience of caste-based discrimination. Then the passage. Long did we wait, but no one turned up. An hour elapsed, and the station master came to inquire. He asked us for our tickets. We showed them to him. He asked us why we tarried. We told him that we were bound for Corrigan and that we were waiting for father or servant to come. Blah, blah, blah. And after that comes, as is usual among the Hindus, the station master asked us who we were. Without a moment's thought, I blurted out that we were Mahars. Now see here, see the difference. There, Muslims don't send their children, most Muslims don't send their children to girls to school is explained by economic factor. Here, the negative stereotyping of Hindus is done. Like most Hindus, he was asking about the jati. So this is in one textbook. They have chosen two passages. One passage negatively stereotypes Hindus. Another passage breaks the negative stereotype of Muslims. So this is what I mean, that if you are going to break the negative stereotypes, break the negative stereotypes, break the negative stereotypes about the Muslims, break the negative stereotypes about the so-called upper caste, break the negative stereotypes about the scheduled communities. Do that in a uniform way. But you cannot do that in a uniform way. The NCERT cannot do that in a uniform way because they are already biased against Indian cultural ethos. That is the problem that we have here. And that is why it is very dangerous.
Yeah, that is it's a dangerous precedent that is being set time and again in some of our textbooks. I'll move on to a topic that I just latched on from your intervention, where you said that there is a great leftist influence on NCERT and other textbook writers, writing bodies in India. The left survives on class wars. It wants to have a perpetual conflict between the haves and the have-nots. And by that logic, if they get textbook writing as a potential battlefield, they will use all the weapons in their armory to propagate their ideas and create perpetual conflicts or sow the seeds of perpetual conflicts in the minds of young and impressionable kids. In that regard, how will you rate such textbook writing organizations in terms of creating social harmony?
There are two ways of looking at the society. One is conflict oriented, another one is harmony oriented. Now, if you look at the Indian way of looking at things, we also do not tolerate injustice. We also want everyone to have an equitable share of opportunities, and they should have an access to the natural resources and opportunities in the nation. So it is not that social justice is private property of the communists or the leftists. Social justice belongs to all. Dharma belongs to all. It is not a prerogative of a particular section of ideological section. So what is actually happening here is, it is not the problem of equality. What is happening is this. In India, Marxism and colonialism are not different. They are one and the same. The way they view Indian culture is the same, through the same prism. They want to demonize Indian culture. They want to negatively essentialize Indian culture. Anything happens in India, then they will put the blame on Jati. Now, I will give you a very solid example for this also. Marxists are supposed to look at the economic factors and socio-economic factors in any phenomenon they see. Anywhere in India, anywhere in the world, that is how they are supposed to look at it. For example, a particular movement comes, then they would say that they won't look into the ideology of the movement, they would look at the different social factors that are creating that, forming that particular movement. This went to such an extent that when Darwin proposed the natural selection, Marx told that actually he is looking at the class relations in British society and he is projecting them onto the natural world. That is the extent to which the Marxists go. But look at India. Take the example of Jati problems here. What do they do? They tell it is all because of Manu. What they are telling is it is because of one particular textbook. It is because of cunning conspiracy of a particular group of people called Brahmins. Exactly what the anti-Semites were talking about to the Jews. Today you see the Marxists talking about the Brahmins, Brahminvad, Manuvad, and all those kind of things. But in reality, what they should have done. I have a very beautiful short story, a science fiction short story written by Isaac Asimov called Strike Breaker. It was included in the anthology of something called sociology through science fiction or anthropology through science fiction in a particular American university, 1970s. This strikebreaker, Asimov traces the origin of caste system and he says jatis, and he says in any society where the resources become scarce, the mobility becomes low, then these hierarchical structures arise. They not only arise, they become very rigid and the social exclusion happens. This is a very rational, I would say, an universal leftist perception, a true leftist perception. We don't have any problem with such a perception. But in India, the leftists are not doing that. They are telling it is because of Manuvas, as if Manuvas and the Brahmins are some kind of an evil, negative other. This is actually extreme right-wing politics anywhere else in the world. In India, it has become the left-wing politics. So this is the problem. With this frame, they are going and writing history textbooks. So what happens is, I will tell from my own experience, because Tamil Nadu Textbook Society is also governed by NCERT. They also abide by the NCERT rules. So you have Vedic India. In Vedic India, what you have is, this is what we learned. I remember it very clearly because for the sake of part 2, 5 more questions, I memorized it. So I remember this very clearly. What all the features of Vedic society? They had superstitions like karma. The Brahmins were performing the yajnas. The Rajas were going and listening to the Brahmins. These were all the characteristic features of Vedic society. No word about Upanishads. No word about Upanishads. Now when I come and see my textbook, our past, here they mention Upanishads in the context of Buddhism, not separately as in the Vedic context. They don't mention Upanishads in the Vedic context. And even when they mention Upanishads, they say that rarely women participated, the Shudras never participated, blatant lies. With the examples, you can show that it is not so. But the point is, this is how they characterize. At the same time, they have a separate section on the teachings of Buddha. They have a separate section on teachings of Mahavira. They have a separate section. We had a separate section on teachings of Jesus, separate section on teachings of Islam. All this was sublime, wonderful. The brotherhood of humanity, the fatherhood of God, and all those kind of things. Love thy neighbor as thyself. All those things. No mention of jihad. But when it comes to Hinduism, it is always superstition. It is always Brahminical dominance. It is always untouchability. Now, why this happens is not because these people are talking about haves and have-nots. It is because these leftists in India are essentially the right wing of the colonial ages. Continuing. That is the problem that we have. We have to detoxify the system of this colonial leftism.
Arvindaji, you mentioned about Darwin and how Marxism views Darwin through their own cockeyed glasses. And history, such textbooks tend to also absorb leftist views on sciences, on mathematics. And many times we come across the fact that our science textbooks are not up to date, they are unimaginative, and they seem to alienate students from the subject matter which is relevant to the current times as well as to the times that are yet to come. Some of them go to university for their higher education in sciences, and what they feel is that they are theoretically adept. They're very good in theory, but when it comes to practice and skilling, that is something which is missing. And that makes one believe that textbooks are becoming obsolete because they're unable to skill students and they are unable to help them make strong, innovative careers. There's no foundation for innovation in our school textbooks. And it reeks of a phenomenon that in the colonial times, schools, colleges, and universities were all meant to create the British bureaucracy. Is the textbook making of today following similar patterns that it used to follow in the colonial era? Does it still want to make bureaucrats, or does it want to make foot soldiers for their Marxist cause?
Yeah, This is a very important question actually, particularly the science textbooks. Look at our science textbooks. The state board textbooks are miserable, horrible. Don't even have to talk about them. Take the NCERT textbooks. Compared to state board textbooks, NCERT textbooks are 1,000 times better. But still, they're uninspiring. For example, I have a science textbook. I just went through the science textbook of my daughters. What I found was this. They have a box item on Aryabhatta. Thankfully, they have a box item on Aryabhatta. That's it. You don't have a, see, when you are teaching science, you should also have a kind of a storyline of how the concepts evolve. That storyline is totally missing. It is as if you have been told that these concepts should be taken to the children, and those concepts have been taken to the children. There is nothing that talks about the method of science. No, the method of science is not at all being taught to our children. And when I did a course in IGNOU, Indira Gandhi National Open University, they had a course called Fundamentals of Science. And this was a must course. You have to take in the first year, whether you take arts or science. So this particular course, they have almost made it as a handbook of Marxism. It was like actually Marxist methodology. They were talking about general sciences and all those kind of things. But ultimately it was about how Indian culture was negative, how we need the Western enlightenment and all those kind of things. And ultimately, they would always talk about Marxism. A very famous example is this. 1975, around 1975, Pushpa Bhargava, the famous cellular biologist, died recently. He created an exhibition called Method of Science Exhibition. This Method of Science Exhibition, and you know, Pushpa Bhargava is a very talented cellular biologist. But if you look at the exhibits, it is about method of science. You don't have a panel on Karl Popper. You don't have a panel on Thomas Kuhn. You have a panel on Karl Marx. You have a panel on Vladimir Lenin. Method of science experiment by a cellular biologist in 1970s. This is how scientific temper was being taught to our children. Then naturally they will be alienated from science as a way of life. See, if you want to do science, there should be a fire for the quest for knowledge, right? Where does that quest come? That quest always comes from the spiritual background of the particular culture of the student. For Albert Einstein, it was Spinoza. And if you read the philosophy of physics by Werner Heisenberg, you will find that he is well versed in Plato and Aristotle. You can do a PhD in physics without knowing about Kanada, without knowing about his Vaiseshika, without knowing about the atomic concept of Vaiseshika. You can do a PhD. This is the kind of situation that is here. And then in parallel to this, there is a propaganda in the public media telling that in India, science was progressing well. The Buddhism was kind of a materialist philosophy. So the Buddhists were scientific. Then came Adi Shankara. Adi Shankara's Mayavada came. And because of Adi Shankara's Mayavada, the entire science became stagnant in India. Again, absolute nonsense. You can argue back and forth, actually. You can tell that the Jains and the Buddhists insisted on non-violence, so they prohibited all the anatomy and dissection procedures, and because of that, science became stagnant. Because of that, science became more and more theoretical. We can go on arguing back and forth and back and forth. But the point is, the general movement is like this, that Indian culture, Indian religion, Indian spirituality, Indian civilizational values are not compatible with the scientific temper. You have to eschew them. You have to become a Marxist, or you have to become a white man in brown skin, and then only you can do good science. This is exactly the reason why our students are not able to do good science. This percolates into our textbooks. So our textbooks are so uninspiring because they cannot tell you about Canada, about Vice Asia, about the atomic concepts, how they existed. Say, for example, you read any article by Subhash Kirk. Why for a science student it is so inspiring? Why we do not have a chapter on George Sudarshan? Why we do not have a chapter on Bose? For even today, educated Indians, if you ask them what did actually Bose do, they will tell Bose discovered that plants have life. This is the kind of knowledge that we give, not about our ancient scientists, about a scientist who lived, who really did a wonderful discovery. This is the kind of thing that we do because we do not want to inspire our children through our own culture and values. And that has affected very badly our science career. We have to change that.
This is absolutely a sorry state for textbooks in India. And there's no reason for us to compare with the state of textbooks elsewhere in the world. We have to look inwards and we have to look at different approaches. And like the fact that we are a civilization that has grown out of knowledge that comes from all walks of life, from everywhere. And with that philosophy in mind, should we, or are we in a phase right now where we can discard textbooks and look up to newer and multiple digital platforms which will be able to provide education to students from kindergarten to students who are in their undergraduate and postgraduate years? Online platforms may not give them the necessary hands-on skills, but they can provide a wide variety of education, uh, science and history and mathematics that they want to learn of their choosing or the choosing of their parents. Can that be possible? Is it time that textbooks be uh, dissected? And it is time that should charitable bodies that have ruled the roost all these years and decades, should they wind up? What do you think?
This is a very important point that you have raised actually, because in my opinion, now that we are discovering NCERT's problems and we are in a place to talk about the problems in NCERT textbooks, in fact, we should thank Arun Shourie, who brought out this problem in a big way to the public gaze. But unfortunately, after that, we have not been able to do much in NCERT. And as you rightly pointed out, perhaps right now we may be moving into that phase where NCERT is becoming part of the past. We have to look at new structures. We have to look at new ways. When we were doing our 12th standard and others, the parents always went for something like brilliant tutorials for getting into IIT, for getting into AIMS, for getting into medical college, and all those kind of things. There were separate coaching centers. Perhaps these coaching centers, the main inspiration for these coaching centers is not quest for truth or anything, but a very practical, mundane thing. Getting into prestigious IIT, getting into a prestigious medical college, cracking the particular entrance exam. For that, they designed their curriculum and they did the work. Perhaps these centers can evolve into new platforms that take over the entire system. I would like to imagine how it would be. What do you think?
We are at the precipice of the fourth industrial revolution, Arvindanji. And that means with greater internet connectivity, with deeper electricity connections, power connectivity in rural areas, there are now kids, underprivileged kids, who have a basic access to internet, a basic access to a few megabytes of data. And kids, be it from Mumbai, be they from rural areas of Bihar, they are all curious. They want to know. They want to know about nature. They want to know about the world they live in, and they will explore different avenues. And it becomes very important. What sort of data do they access? This pandemic has really driven the entire scholastic infrastructure to look at alternative systems. So many in the urban, semi-urban areas, many schools have gone entirely virtual. And there have been quite a few edutech platforms that have cropped up who are now using the same curriculum, presenting it in a way which is what the schools are offering. So I started to think that what happens or what will happen if these edutech companies start behaving like an NCERT or start developing biases like NCERT. But the second moment, I also think that if one platform starts behaving in a certain way, once it starts acquiring a certain bias, you will have a parallel platform growing up with neutralizing effect. The predominance of one type of a curriculum maker will go away in the next few years, and you will have multiple curriculum makers, each offering a curriculum that is relevant to the public, that is of interest, that is of national interest, a curriculum that is state of the art, and which is preparing the student for the time to come, and a curriculum which is harmonious in nature rather than one which creates fault lines and conflicts. And I believe there are many investors who want to invest in building such curriculum platforms. You need people to come forward and start making this content, like the content that we make for YouTube through forums like Atharva, like the content we make for general masses through books, the topics that you write on. We'll need, you know, radically innovative curriculum makers who are grounded in Indian philosophy, who are grounded in this soil, and who want the betterment of this nation. We need those kind of curriculum makers. And I believe COVID-19 has catalyzed the need for such cohorts. I'll also try to ask you from here, I mean, after my intervention, do you think that the ideological battles will extend on edutech platforms, or do you share my optimism?
There can be no doubt that these ideological battles will move to those platforms. Already they should be doing right now that. I will give you a parallel example outside this. Till 1991, the leftist scholarship in India, mainly they were they were supported by the Soviets and the Marxist infrastructure here. They were dominating all the places, all the scholarly areas. Once in 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. If you see, the entire leftist historians, the social scientists or whatever, they moved over to United States, South Asian departments, the so-called South Asian departments. And if you look from a 1980s point of view, if you ask a so-called non-left person in India, he would say that, or even a leftist person, he would say that United States is capitalist. Whatever comes out of United States is capitalist propaganda, and whatever that comes out of Soviet Union is all truth and socialist and all that. But see what has happened down the line. The communists, the leftists have taken over the social science departments of United States, particularly with respect to India. With respect to India, particularly. The same thing can happen here also. For example, who would not like to have an Oxford University-based professor for creating their contents in this kind of a platform? So whom they would call? they would call a Rumila Thapar to write about Indian history, create a module on Indian history. They would call her. And take public science, popular science writing in India. Take popular science writing in India. Popular science writing in India is unfortunately dominated by the leftists. That is why the popular science writing in India is very unimaginative, very mediocre, because they ape, once they aped the Soviet Union, now they are aping the Westerners. They don't have their own feel to write about Indian sciences, about science in an Indian context. So we need to create people who feel India, write about science for popular science. There should be popular science books. Like V.S. Ramachandran's book is a very good example where he approaches the problems from some Indic framework. You had George Sudarshan who could give you that. The West itself, you have persons like Fritjof Capra who have a dharmic perspective of not just new physics, but also systems view of life and other things. We need more youngsters like you who are well rooted in science and who also have a feel for the heart of India. You have to come out and now I have seen a lot of youngsters like you who are in science curriculum, but who also have a lot of considerable knowledge and considerable rootedness in Indian culture and spiritual traditions. They have to come out and write popular science books, because this will be the preparation that we do to take over that platform when they come into being. Otherwise, we will be handing it over to the leftists with our money. The future of our children will be handed over to the leftists in a platter. That is what would happen in these platforms if we do not intervene now. And that involves a lot of hard work, a lot of in-depth intelligence, and it is not exactly an enviable position. We have to do terrible amount of work to prevent leftist takeover and to direct them in a positive way.
Arvindanji, you just mentioned about the Soviet Union subsidizing education or education writers, educationists in India at some point of time, and today American universities, particularly the South Asia departments, do the same. Is there a concern that if Indian philanthropists, Indian venture capital money doesn't come into edutech, and this education technology platforms are funded by overseas players, is there a threat that the source of the money will determine what sort of curriculum should be made?
Definitely. There's no doubt about it. See, already, if you want to watch a quality documentary, where do we go? Forget all those ideological, evangelical stuff, everything. If I want to watch a quality documentary on wildlife, to which channel I go today? I go to National Geographic or I go to Discovery Channel. So in a way, already the West controls the way you look at things. If something comes in National Geographic, then I will have a greater faith on it than it comes in the Astha. That is the general mindset. That is the general way we have, and I won't even tell that it is wrong, but they have worked to gain that kind of credibility, but still they will be giving only their values and their frameworks. We have to put in hard work, and we have to make sure that people look at us, look at our way of presenting things, and they should start desiring it. We have to do that. If we do that, then the venture capitalist money that comes will come into our structures. Otherwise, even if the venture capital money is from our people, it will go into their structures. And then what kind of vested interest, what kind of manipulations that can happen behind the scene will be absolutely encapsulated by that side. And we won't have access to it. So it is a very dangerous situation. If we are not, see, the only real capital here that we can work with is the intelligence and the civilizational worth our culture has. And if we do not use that properly, then it will be thrown away and their system will come and occupy it. And when they fund, they will be funding for their own whatever vested interest they have also. Even if they have philanthropic intentions, there will be vested interest. And that will get...
In the coming times of cyber physical systems, in the coming times of AI, in the coming times where mind has become the next battlefield, the content that the mind is subjected to is becoming very important. It is the next battleground. Battles are no more being fought with weapons, with artillery, with cavalry, with missiles, but you find every now and then the country is at war with propaganda. The country is at war with a certain uh, doctrinal propaganda, a certain kind of ideology. And in this case, curriculum that is offered to young and impressionable minds needs to be curated in a way that it is sanitized to keep to maintain the innocence, to maintain the creativity of the young ones. Yet at the same time, it is the slow dosage of real world facts which needs to be given to the kids very often. And as you rightly mentioned, that capital is very important. The source of the capital and the motivation of the people who are in control of that capital is very important. In the past few years, we've noticed that a lot of India's top industrialists have invested heavily in setting up departments in Western universities. They do that because they want to be in the creme de la creme of Western academia, uh, be seen as a good philanthropist of Indian origin, and it gives them a good legacy because these Western universities attract students from all over the world. And having a department named after your family or your company gives very good footage and brand value. But we've found that many of the same industrialists don't show the same passion in setting up institutions in India. And we need greater institutions that are autonomous, that do not depend on curriculum given by bodies like NCERT. We need a lot of them. And that means, uh, actually, we are talking here about private institutions. Uh, what is your feeling about private institutions and private universities that are coming up in India? And what should we do to set up universities that are committed to a nationalist cause?
Number one, talking about Indians going and setting up, let us say, teaching positions or a particular center in Western universities. More often than not, what happens is that these institutions get captured by anti-India forces. A very good example is, I think, California Institute of Integral Studies. Basically, it was instituted by people who were in love with Sri Aurobindo's philosophy and other things, true lovers of India. Even such an institution was captured by completely anti-Hindu forces, completely anti-Indian forces who were supporting Kashmiri terrorists, and a lot of drama went. Everybody knows about that. Now, so even if you create an Indology Institute, for example, in the Western countries, the West, they can be captured by anti-India forces because the very nature of Indology is like that. I think in the Atharva Forum itself, Coenrod has pointed out this, that let us say a person goes to study Indology, and let us say a person goes to study Sinology. When the person who goes to study Indology, when he comes out, he will see India as an oppressive state. When a person who goes to study Sinology, when he comes out, he will start defending China's presence in Tibet. So this is the kind of things that happen. In India also the same thing. For example, a very good example is the Sanskrit University in Kaladi. Adi Shankara Sanskrit University in Kaladi. It is today completely taken over by the leftists. A person called K.N. Panikkar was vice chancellor of it, who was a totally anti-Hindu guy, extreme radical Marxist. He was the vice chancellor. So even if you create institutions, the institutions by themselves can be taken over by completely anti-Hindu forces. Now you have to then create the curriculum. The software has to be in place, and the software has to be valuable. It has to create results. You have to do that. You have to win the perception battle. You can talk a lot, but you have to show. You have to show that this particular aspect of the Indic or the Hindu way of looking at things has created results. Like Bose created the result in case of Bose Institute of Science. Just love for Vedanta in a physicist, knowledge of Vedanta in a physicist, what kind of a beautiful physicist it can create is an example. Sudarshan's life is an example. So you can see that you have to create a curriculum that is not talking about the greatness of the past, but uses the past to create wonderful future, wonderful results. We have to do that first. And you have to make sure that you have a winning workable model that is tested in the ground in India. If that is done, then we can scale it up, and then we can create institutions which teach only this, which teach only through this particular framework, which approaches problems only through this particular framework, which can understand Marxism and place Marxism or place any other form of Western form of looking at India, Freudian, post-Freudian, post-colonial, structuralist, post-structuralist, postmodern, and all that kind of jazz. You can place them in the larger framework of the Hindu framework, the larger, deeper Hindu framework. You can place it and you can teach your science, your social science in that framework. You have to create that model and you have to show that they are working. Like a very good example is Nanaji Deshmukh did it. In his Chitrakoot, he did this, he worked out this model. Problem, have we created a textbook based on that? Have we created a textbook of approaching the problems of life in biology based on the Vedantic framework that very successfully Jagadish Chandra Bose used, the Vedantic framework that very successfully Josh Sudarshan used in approaching his problems in physics? Have we created those models? That is the problem that we have. There we have to work. Interdisciplinary work is essential. Pedagogies based on interdisciplinary works for science have to be created from the school to the research curriculum. We have to create this. Not a simple task, but a very urgent one, if we have to win that particular battle of the coming educational platforms.
Ramananji, before we close, I'd like to ask that changing textbooks, changing content and curriculum of textbooks is an arduous task. And many a times it is completely out of bounds of the students, teachers, as well as the parents. And of these three, the most worried are the parents. How do parents deal with the idiosyncrasies of such a biased curriculum? What do they teach their kids, and what sort of alternate literature can they provide? That literature may not be necessary for scoring marks or scoring grades, but at the end of the day, kids go to school to learn something and value that and take those values and build their lives for living in that society. If the parents are aware that something is terribly wrong in the curriculum, what sort of measures should they take? What sort of alternate books should be provided? And if not books, what sort of alternate platforms should be given to such kids and parents?
I will go to our own Puranas to answer this question. Okay. When Prahalada went to the syllabus, the school that was created by Hiranyakasipu, he was taught the history, he was taught the social sciences, he was taught the worldview of Hiranyakasipu. Yet, because Narada has taught a very organic way of looking at things when he was in the womb itself, so he was able to resist it. So the point is, fortify our children with our cultural knowledge in the house, the home. Expect this assault. Expect this assault of Narada, expected the assault of Hiranyakasipu's system. And so he created this. It is very good, it will be very, very great if the system that Narada created and the system that was existing outside, both are having the same spirit. It is not. So we have this confrontational model. It has been thrust upon us. We didn't ask for it, it has been thrust upon us. So what I would say is, create the fortification, the cultural, spiritual fortification in the house, so that the child will be able to look at what he is receiving in the right perspective in the school. He knows he should learn science, but he never has to learn the package that comes along with that, the form of Marxism or in the form of anti-Hindu propaganda through the textbooks. So for that, the parents had to make themselves cultural and science literates. We need a basic science and a cultural curriculum for the parents. The parents should be able to teach the children, see, this is what science is. This is what culture is. This is what the way of looking at things are from the Hindu point of view. They have to teach them that. They have to teach them that what we have is a wonderful thing. They have to tell them, yeah, you learned Muhammad Ghazni came not for religious reasons, but for economic reasons. Okay, forget that. But do you know that 25,000 Hindus gave themselves? They are not teaching you about Guru Desh Bahadur. Guru Desh Bahadur is dismissed with one line. Teach the child about Guru Desh Bahadur. Teach the child about Jnaneshwar. Teach the child about Kabir and Dukharam. The child, when he goes, he should be or she should be more knowledgeable than the teacher with respect to Indian culture and Indian history, with respect to science, with respect to any particular thing. For that, we have to take this extra effort. If we don't take the extra effort, what we are doing is, see, the entire school system is created by our taxes. So essentially, we see this as our system. So when we are sending our children to our schools in independent India, we expect the system to teach them about our culture in a positive way. More often than not, we don't even touch their textbooks. Our boys are studying well, okay, they are going to the temple, well, but they are having an inner conflict. And when this inner conflict grows in them, they will end up as T.M. Krishna. The worst tragedy that can happen to a human being is T.M. Krishna. That is what would happen to our children. Now, to avoid that, what we have to do, the parents have to take the extra, they have to go the extra mile. They have to study. They have to make themselves dharmic parents, not in terms of mere ritualism alone. I am not discounting ritualism, not in terms of mere ritualism alone. They have to tell them about the Veer Shivaji, the significance of Veer Shivaji. Because discovery of India tells that the Marathas were mere adventurers who just destabilized the Mughal system. Nothing more they did. They didn't achieve anything. Now we have to tell our children, this is what happened. When you teach them Vidyaranya, you have to teach them how Harikara Bukka were taken back from getting converted. They were taken back, and so this system was so socially progressive. You have to make them understand this. So this is the problem. This is the thing that we have to do. The point is, actually, we are here reinventing the wheel, because somehow in India this system was in effect. As I said earlier in another context, Vinoba Bhave was talking to an educationist, and he was talking about how we are going to take this history to these Indians who are not at all conscious of their history. Then Vinoba Bhave said, a simple person was working there in the field, and Vinoba Bhave called that person and asked him, do you know about Akbar? He told, I don't know. Do you know about Shah Jahan? I don't know. Then he asked, do you know about Kabir? Do you know about Tukaram? Do you know about Tulasidas? For each he said yes. Today, you look at our children. They don't know about Tukaram. They don't know about Jnaneshwar. They don't know about Nayanmars and Alvars. Completely cut off. What do they know about? They know about Shah Jahan built Taj Mahal for his dead wife. That is what they know about. They know about the Red Fort. They know about all the wars. Alexander is known as the Great. In India, the mendicants were considered as the great. And they were the real movers of the civilization. That history textbook is not going to teach them that. We have to teach them that. We have to take the extra mile and we have to teach them. And don't expect the government to change the textbooks, because today a government comes and changes the textbook. Tomorrow another government comes and rechanges the textbook. Let us not fall into this ping pong play, because the leftists have more experience on that. They can beat us very easily. Let us concentrate on the houses and make our children strong. Immunize them against this COVID of Nehruvianism. It is what we have to do.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Arvindanji. This was really illuminating in a way that we always felt that we study many a times trash in school. We fall for the trap of scoring high marks, and with those high marks scored with trash curriculum, we are wanting to get into good universities and build our careers upon that. This only signifies that the foundation is weak enough to make a good human being out of those good scorers. What we need to do, as you rightly said, is build homes. And once we build homes, once we solidify and consolidate the families, and education is not just teacher to student. Education begins with your own mother. Education begins with your own father, your grandparents, your siblings. And this is where we should right now focus on. And as you rightly said, there's no point fighting with curriculum makers that are sitting on plush positions in national capitals and state capitals, because it's very difficult to outdo them or to get rid of them. But as you rightly said, there are ways where you can chart a path which need not overturn and get into any conflict with these people. So thank you so much. This has been really illuminating, and I hope the listeners, many of them will be parents to a lot of kids, and they will be taking a good lesson from here. So thank you once again, and we'll meet again soon.